The German prisoners laughed when the new order was nailed to the camp gate, but the laughter died when an American guard ripped the first hidden ration ledger from a prisoner's coat. Another MP dragged a stolen medicine crate from beneath the barracks floor, and one German officer tried to tear the order down before the ink had dried, because the joke had suddenly named every privilege they had been using to control the camp from the inside. The order arrived on a cold morning, folded inside a stiff envelope carried by an American courier who did not stop at the command office first. He walked straight to the main gate, handed the paper to the duty sergeant, and watched two guards nail it beside the prisoner roll call board where every German in the yard could see it. At first, the prisoners treated it like theater. A group of German officers near the barracks door laughed as the interpreter began reading Eisenhower's new restrictions aloud. No private prisoner courts, no unofficial ration control, no officer privileges used to command enlisted men, no hidden punishment lists, and no internal discipline outside American authority. One German major stepped forward with a dry smile and asked whether the Americans truly believed a paper on a gate could change how German soldiers obeyed German officers. Several prisoners behind him laughed harder, and one of them tapped his boot against the dirt as if the order were a children's rule. The laughter stopped when a thin enlisted prisoner near the rear line suddenly raised his hand. He did not speak at first. He only reached into his torn coat, pulled out a folded ration ledger, and threw it toward the American guard before the German major could turn around. The major lunged for it, but the guard kicked the ledger away and caught it under his boot. The interpreter opened the pages and found prisoner names divided into groups: loyal, unreliable, useful, sick, and silent. Besides, several names were food marks and medicine marks that did not belong in any official record. Another prisoner bolted toward Barracks 3. Two MPs chased him through the yard, knocked open the barracks door, and found him on his knees beside a loosened floor plank. Under the plank sat a wooden crate filled with Red Cross medicine, coffee packets, cigarettes, and letters that had never reached the men named on the envelopes. The German major shouted that the items had been stored for fair distribution. The thin prisoner shouted back that sick men had been forced to trade statements, silence, and obedience for medicine that was already theirs. The yard split at once, with officers on one side and frightened enlisted men watching from the other. The duty sergeant ordered the barracks sealed. American guards carried the medicine crate into the open and placed it beneath Eisenhower's order. What the officers had mocked as a joke now stood over the first evidence table, with stolen supplies stacked like an answer. A second German officer tried to tear the order from the gate while everyone looked at the crate. An MP grabbed his wrist and pulled him back hard enough to expose a small notebook hidden inside his sleeve. It contained the same categories as the ration ledger, but with punishment marks beside men who had spoken to Americans. The camp commander arrived too late to calm the yard. He tried to move the discussion inside, away from the prisoners, but the duty sergeant refused and ordered every German officer separated from the enlisted lines. The new order would be enforced in public because the first public laugh had already uncovered a hidden chain of control. The initial conflict was no longer about whether German officers respected an American order. It was about whether the camp had been quietly ruled by men who treated food, medicine, letters, and fear as weapons, and whether Eisenhower's paper had struck the exact place they thought Americans would never touch. The escalation began when the American guards searched the officers' barracks before the first evidence crate had even been cataloged. They removed mattresses, opened shaving kits, checked boot linings, and pulled boards from the walls while the German major watched from the yard with his hands locked behind his back. Inside one bunk frame, an MP found a folded camp map marked with arrows leading from the kitchen, infirmary, mailroom, and laundry shed. Each arrow ended at Barracks 3. The map showed how supplies moved away from official stations before enlisted prisoners ever saw them. The kitchen was searched next. Behind sacks of potatoes, guards found a locked metal box containing ration cards stamped as issued. The cook claimed the cards had already been fulfilled, but an enlisted prisoner stepped forward and said his name appeared on 3 cards even though he had received nothing for 2 days. The infirmary produced a worse discovery. A medic opened a cabinet and found empty medicine envelopes with German names written in American pencil. The envelopes were recorded as delivered, but the contents had been removed and stored under the barracks floor, where officers decided who was worthy of treatment. The German major tried to interrupt every witness. The duty sergeant ordered him placed beside the gate under guard, directly beneath the order he had mocked. Every time he spoke over a prisoner, the interpreter recorded the interruption as part of the investigation. A prisoner from the laundry crew then led MPs to a drying room where coat linings had been cut open and resewn. Inside one lining, they found letters from families in Germany, still sealed, along with notes written by prisoners asking for protection from officer pressure. The mailroom clerk was brought forward. He said German officer representatives had been allowed to help sort mail because they knew names and ranks. Under questioning, he admitted that some letters had been withheld when officers claimed the recipients were disciplinary problems. The escalation turned sharper when one withheld letter was opened in front of witnesses. It contained news that a prisoner's wife and child were alive in the American zone. The man who should have received it stepped from the line, reached for the paper, and began smiling through tears before forcing his face still because the German officers were watching him. That moment changed the mood of the yard. The order had begun with laughter, but now every prisoner understood that the hidden system had touched hunger, sickness, family, and fear. The American guards moved faster, searching not only for weapons, but for every quiet thing used to control a man. The German major tried to call the investigation chaos. The duty sergeant answered by ordering all discovered items placed in 4 rows beneath the order: food, medicine, mail, and punishment notes. The categories on the evidence table matched the categories in the hidden ledgers. Before sunset, a runner arrived from the farm detail reporting that 2 prisoners had refused to return to the main yard after hearing the officers had been separated. They were found in a tool shed, holding a stolen ration card and a note warning them to stay silent until the new order was ignored. The escalation ended with Eisenhower's order copied and posted on every barracks door, not as decoration, but as a warning that any prisoner who had used rank to control another man would lose access to food lines, mail lists, work assignments, and medical requests before the next roll call. The major consequence came at dawn when the first officer privileges were removed. The separate coffee line was closed, private writing hour was canceled, officer barracks inspections became daily, and all prisoner representatives were suspended until American guards could confirm who had been elected freely and who had ruled by fear. The German major refused to stand in the general ration line. He remained near the barracks steps with 6 officers behind him, arms crossed, while enlisted prisoners watched from the far side of the yard. The duty sergeant ordered the food line to move without them. When the first enlisted prisoners received full rations directly from American hands, the effect was immediate. Men who had eaten last for months reached the table first. One sick prisoner received medicine before an officer could stop him. Another received 2 letters withheld since winter. The major consequence was not comfort. It was exposure. Every time an enlisted man received something directly, the old system lost a tool. The officers who had mocked the order now had to watch the camp continue without their permission. A German captain tried to rebuild authority by calling a secret meeting near the washroom. Guards saw men gathering in pairs and moved in quickly. Inside the washroom stove, they found a rolled paper listing enlisted prisoners who had accepted direct rations that morning. The captain claimed it was only a count. The interpreter read the title aloud: Men Who Forgot Honor. The phrase moved through the yard like a warning, and 3 prisoners who had stepped forward for letters earlier were immediately placed under guard protection. The duty sergeant ordered a public face count. Every prisoner stood by barracks number while Americans checked him against the official roster, not the German officer lists. The hidden categories collapsed one by one because men marked silent, unreliable, or sick were now standing in the open. The consequence reached the camp staff when the American supply clerk admitted he had trusted German officers to report internal needs. He had accepted their summaries because they were neat, efficient, and written in perfect columns. The hidden ledgers showed those columns had been used to bury real requests. The commander relieved the supply clerk from prisoner distribution duties and assigned American guards directly to food, mail, and medicine stations. No prisoner rank would control access. No officer would decide which enlisted man deserved a letter, a pill, or a bowl. The German major lost his first visible battle when the sick prisoner he had marked unreliable was carried to the infirmary and given treatment ahead of the officers. The man passed the major on a stretcher, clutching his recovered family letter against his chest. By afternoon, the officer barracks had been searched again, and their private storage shelves were emptied into the yard. Extra blankets, tobacco tins, soap, medicine, and unopened food parcels were counted in front of men who had been told supplies were low. The major consequence became official when the commander signed a camp order enforcing Eisenhower's rules immediately. The German officers could still keep their names and ranks for record purposes, but their power inside the camp had been cut away from the things men needed to survive. The major reversal began when the prisoners expected the suspended officer system to collapse into disorder, but the opposite happened before breakfast. The enlisted men formed the ration line without shouting. Sick prisoners were carried first, and the laundry crew returned withheld coats without waiting for instructions. The American guards watched the yard move more smoothly than it had under the German officers. The commander ordered the interpreter to ask who had organized the line. A gray-haired German sergeant stepped forward and said no one had ordered it. The men simply knew what fair distribution looked like after being denied it. The reversal deepened when the kitchen cook opened a hidden panel behind the bread ovens and revealed 2 more boxes of withheld supplies. He said he had hidden them from the officers after learning the new order was coming, because he feared the supplies would be moved before morning. Inside the boxes were medicine labels, ration cards, and a notebook different from the others. This notebook listed men who had helped protect weaker prisoners, not punish them. The names included the thin prisoner who threw the first ledger and the cook who had hidden supplies for direct distribution. The German major tried to claim these men had created a rival faction. The duty sergeant placed both notebooks side by side. One used food to control, the other tracked who needed help. The difference was so visible that even prisoners who could not read understood it from the evidence table. The strongest reversal came from the infirmary. The sick prisoner who had received medicine that morning identified an officer's signature on a denied treatment request. The same officer had claimed no medicine was available. The hidden crate proved the medicine existed when the request was refused. The commander ordered the officer brought forward and made him stand beside the medicine crate while the medic read the request aloud. The prisoners did not shout. They watched the paper, the crate, and the officer's face, seeing the lie become physical. Then the thin prisoner produced the final piece from his boot, a list of men who had planned to testify if Americans ever removed officer control. He had carried it for weeks, waiting for any sign that speaking would not cost him food or mail. The reversal became complete when those men were called one by one and placed under American protection. They were not treated as rebels. They became witnesses, clerks, and guides for rebuilding the camp records from the ground up. The German major no longer looked like the defender of order. He looked like the reason order had been false. Eisenhower's new rule, mocked as a joke in the morning, had revealed that the camp functioned better the moment the officers lost their hidden privileges. By sunset, a new prisoner committee was created under American supervision, with elected representatives from barracks groups instead of ranks. The first task was not discipline. It was to return every withheld letter, record every sick man, and match every parcel to the prisoner it belonged to. The major reversal was impossible to miss. The order had not weakened the camp. It had removed the people who made weakness profitable, and the prisoners who were supposed to be helpless began repairing the system faster than the officers had ever run it. The final irreversible event began that night when the German major tried to send a message through the laundry chute. A guard heard metal scrape against the wall and pulled out a soap tin tied with thread. Inside was a note ordering loyal officers to destroy the second ledger before American review. The guards entered the officer barracks with lanterns and found two men lifting a floorboard beneath a bunk. Under it was the missing second ledger, wrapped in oilcloth, along with ration stamps, officer privilege slips, and a list of American Guard routines. The second ledger was worse than the first. It did not only track food and medicine. It tracked pressure points, who had children, who was sick, who feared being called a traitor, who could be made silent with withheld letters, and who could be turned against another prisoner. The commander ordered the ledger read into the record under floodlights. The German major stood beside the gate where the first order had been nailed, while the men he had controlled listened to the categories finally spoken aloud by American authority. A prisoner, named in the ledger as Easy to Pressure, stepped forward with a recovered letter in his hand. He said he had signed false complaints against other prisoners because officers told him his family mail would stop if he refused. The clerk recorded his statement and attached the letter to the page that named him. The major tried to claim the ledger was necessary to prevent disorder. The duty sergeant ordered the evidence table rearranged in front of him. The stolen parcels, withheld letters, denied medicine, loyalty lists, false complaints, and the second ledger. The pattern no longer needed explanation. Before dawn, the commander signed the final enforcement order. All German officer control over rations, mail, medical access, work assignments, complaints, and barracks discipline was permanently abolished. Any attempt to recreate the system would lead to immediate isolation and formal investigation. The German major and his closest officers were moved to separate guarded quarters. They were allowed their legal status as prisoners, but no longer their informal throne inside the camp. They left the barracks without ledgers, assistants, private stores, or the fear that had carried their orders. The final roll call under the new system began as the sun rose. Each man received his name from an American list, not an officer list. Letters were handed out by guards. Medicine requests were taken by medics. Food parcels were opened in public and matched to labels. The thin prisoner who threw the first ledger was called to the office. He expected questioning, but instead he was asked to help reconstruct the stolen mail records. He sat at a table with American clerks and began matching handwriting to names while the old officer group watched from behind a fence. The final irreversible moment came when the original order was taken down from the gate, not because it was canceled, but because a permanent board replaced it. The new board listed the rules in English and German, under glass, with the commander's signature and the date of enforcement. The joke was over in the only way that mattered. The German POWs who laughed at the paper now had to live under the system it created, while the men who had been hungry, silenced, and watched finally saw the camp move without asking permission from the officers who once controlled every line. The next morning, the evidence crates left the camp office with the hidden ledgers, ration cards, withheld letters, and medicine lists sealed inside. The German major watched from separate quarters as enlisted prisoners collected mail directly from American guards for the first time. Eisenhower's order still hung under glass at the gate, no longer a joke and no longer fresh ink, but the rule that ended the quiet camp government the officers thought would never fall.